But we are going to get into the word of the Lord. Let's stand together. We'll read one verse together, then I will let you sit down and we will continue on. It is our habit and style to stand for the initial reading. I'm in Deuteronomy chapter number 19, and I'm reading at verse 14. I'm continuing a Bible study on justice. I believe justice is a subject that's very, very close to the heart of God, and that is shown repeatedly in the Scripture, both Old Testament and New. In fact, the great work and gift of Calvary is not just a picture of mercy, it's a picture of justice. God did not just ignore his law, he paid the debt that justice demanded. We'll read verse 14 first. You shall not remove your neighbor's landmark, which the men of old have set, in your inheritance, which you will inherit in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. You may be seated. Now, continue with me as we have a somewhat more lengthy reading. Y'all going to give me trouble tonight? Don't make me come over there. I will have Sister Elms come sit between you guys. Verse 15, one witness shall not rise against a man concerning any iniquity or any sin that he commits. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses the matter shall be established. If a false witness rises against any man to testify against him of wrongdoing, then both men in the controversy shall stand before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who serve in those days, and the judges shall make careful inquiry. Somebody say careful inquiry. And indeed, if the witness is a false witness who has testified falsely against his brother, then you shall do to him as he thought to have done to his brother. So you shall put away the evil from among you. You shall put away the evil from among you. What evil? Bearing false witness. And those who remain shall hear and fear, and hereafter they shall not again commit such evil. What evil? Bearing false witness. Your eye shall not pity, life shall be for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, and foot for foot. We have spent the last few Wednesday night Bible studies talking on this issue of justice. It's close to God's heart, and I think it is an area in which so often good people, religious people, sincere people, in our zeal and in our passion for godly things, we transgress and we err and we get involved in other people's business because we want so much for their good and we wish so much for their right living and we desire so much their essential conformity to God's law, and we end up worrying more about our neighbor's business than we do our own. And it is a common problem among zealous people for us to have transgressions of justice. Almost every church problem I have ever heard about in my life traces back to a transgression of justice. Almost every church split I have ever heard of in my life traces back to a transgression of justice. Every organizational division that I have ever heard of in my whole life goes back to a transgression of justice. In fact, I believe the enemy's secret plan to cause confusion and division among God's people is to get us counter to each other, opposite to each other, about things that we ought not to be fighting about, but things that we ought to be leaving to the review and the remit of somebody who has jurisdiction and authority in that area. So I started this series asking you to think of these 5 things. Number 1, only one has perfect justice. Who's that? That's God. Number 2, no two people will always agree on what perfect justice is. Number 3, as a result, I should not require you to agree with me on matters of perfect justice. I should not require you to agree with me. But number 4, I should ask myself if you are sincere. And if you are sincere, then number 5, I should allow you to be different than me and still be sincere. still be operating in good faith, still be a person of integrity. We are required by God in both Old Testament and New to live justly, to act justly. Micah said it best, "He hath shown thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee?" Number one, do justly. Number two, love mercy. Preached about that last Sunday. And number three, to walk humbly before your God. And so today we read this passage here where there is a divine order giving to the children of Israel on how to conduct their affairs. This past Wednesday night, I talked about how government has a purpose, and that government is not necessarily, we are not our own government, but we allow someone to be chosen through some process, and that person then makes the law. We choose one from among us, and that person decides for us. We do not vote on the law. We may vote on a judge, depending on the ordinances of your state, but we do not vote on the law, we vote on the judge. We may vote on the lawmaker, but we do not vote on the law. Each of us has an area that we are given by authority, by order, by law, by government, shall we say, by responsibility, by career, by expertise, by education. Each of us are given an area that we are to lead in and we are to judge in. And we talked about some biblical principles last week. When we critique an area which is not ours, and we critique on the basis of hearsay. In other words, I do not know what really happened, but it did not stop me from having an opinion. Now, I want you to be reassured this has never happened in our church. Nobody in our church has ever had an opinion about anything they didn't know much about. We only have opinions about things we are expert in. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to talk about lying and honesty and the like. When I critique an area on the basis of hearsay, the Bible calls that speaking evil one of another. Okay, multiple passages, multiple places. When I critique someone on the basis of a hearsay, I heard Brother so-and-so did X and so, and I pick up my phone and, why you did that? I am speaking evil. Why? I am judging them on the basis of hearsay. I do not know that is speaking evil. The second thing, when I critique someone in some other area on the basis of evidence. This is not hearsay. I know that this happened. I am a witness of some type. I know this happened. That's not called speaking evil. That's called judging. Now, even when the Bible speaks of judging, and we do of necessity make judgment calls in our life, but even when the Bible speaks of this, there is caution there, and the Bible is clear that there are certain areas that we are not to judge. It doesn't matter if we have evidence, it's not our business. There are certain areas we are not to judge. Why? It's not our jurisdiction. I may think you have a great marriage. I may think you have a bad marriage, okay? But I'm not in your marriage, with the exception of this really pretty lady right over here. I get to have an opinion about my marriage, you see? But it doesn't matter if I have evidence that you have a good marriage or a bad marriage. It's not my area of jurisdiction. And for me to get involved in your marriage, boy, it's so quiet. I must be doing an amazing job. For me to get involved in your marriage is a transgression of justice. Why? It's not my jurisdiction. Okay? So let me really quickly just say, for all your listening pleasure, if you are at the age of life when you have adult children, I know the temptation will be ever so strong for you to get involved in their marriage, but I want you to know it is not your business. Let my mom and dad be an example to you of how to stay out of their marriage. Not their marriage, but you get the idea. You don't want to get in their marriage. I mean, Sister Elms could just beat you up tonight if that's what you're looking for. No, I'm just having fun. We'll hug it out later. You understand what I'm saying? One of the great compliments that I can give to my mom and dad as being people in the family is their loyalty while staying out of your business. All of you who have adult children, you will be ever so tempted to go trot down to their house and straighten them out. It's not your business. It's just not your bit. You don't have jurisdiction. You see, the Bible says you give them away. Okay, that woman, that the Bible actually reverses it, and it's you think it's the woman given away, but it's like the man. You understand what I'm trying to say, or maybe you don't. I don't either. The point is, once they have their own household, it is ever so tempting. But I promise you, and I'm going to say this gently. But I want to say it because it's good for the goose and it's good for the gander. Okay, there are people who should be in church right now, but they don't want to go to they don't want to go to church with people who are in their business. And that in some cases includes parents, aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters. They don't want people in their business. So jurisdiction matters. And I know it's quiet, and I know no one's excited, and I won't get a lot of compliments, which is very difficult for me. Okay, so anyway, point being, we are given an area of jurisdiction, and I am not to judge outside of my area of jurisdiction. The Bible's clear. We talked a lot about it last week. I'm not to judge another man's servant. He already has a master. Many of you know Marcus and Tonya Huntley with us for a long time now. They pastor in Hickory. Brother Marcus and I will talk on the phone. Sometimes he'll tell me stuff in his church. Sometimes I'll commiserate and tell him stuff in my church. Yeah, I got crazy people too, so but I'll tell you what I don't do. I don't judge his church. Why? It's not my church. You see what I'm saying? It would be inappropriate for me to get outside my jurisdiction. A lot of the division that has happened in churches is people feel too comfortable transgressing justice, and they get involved in things that was not their jurisdiction to get involved in. All of us have ministries that we're involved in. We need to give the best of ourselves to those ministries, and we don't need to get involved criticizing other ministries. That is not our responsibility to criticize. Okay? And so this is jurisdiction, and I am spending too long on it, so let me move along. The next thing I want to point out that happens to us that is a transgression of justice, and we're going to talk about it tonight, is something can happen as we grow in our personal knowledge of God and grow in our personal experience with the work of God. And that is, we are given mentors in our life, and those mentors are a gift to us. And we do not remain in the same roles over time. In other words, some of you, when you first came to church, you would be the first to admit you knew next to nothing, and God strategically placed you with somebody who would be a shepherd to you, who would be a strength to you, and they would encourage you, and they would walk with you. And that person may not, interestingly, have even been in the church that good themselves. But they still were an encouragement to you, and they still were a mentor to you. And the truth is, if you keep serving the Lord, you may get to a point where the student surpasses the teacher. Okay, this is real. Let's be real. The student surpasses the teacher. And there's a temptation when that happens for you to tear them down in your mind, because you can see the flaws, the errors, the bad habits, the neuroticisms. That's the mental, traps they fall into, and they can't keep down. You can see the mistakes they made. At one time, they were a hero to you. At one time, they were a mentor to you. At one time, they were an elder to you. And now the student has begun to surpass the teacher. It is not an insult to the teacher to have the student surpass the teacher. Indeed, if generations have any progressive accomplishment, the students must surpass the teachers. This is not an insult to the teacher. It is a compliment to the teacher. Okay? So stay with me on this. But what we can fall in the habit of doing is we can fall in our lives and serving God where we tear down our heroes. And we criticize our elders. And we find the flaws in them. At one time, they were our lifeline, and now we see the flaws in them. And we see the bad habits, and we see the quick presumptions, and we tear down in our heart and in our mind. We tear down that individual. Let me give you an example. Let's say there was a young person in our church who they came up through our youth group, and they just, because they had spent a lot of time with our student ministry, and they spent a lot of time talking to Brother Adam. I wish Brother Adam, he's teaching next door. I always like people to be in the church when I pick on them. Okay, so I want to pick on him. So a young person grows up, and they have just kind of an awe awe for Brother Adam. And Brother Adam Cruz, our student pastor. And they're just like, oh man, he's just awesome. They grew up, he was there for him. He was encouragement to him. And now they're growing up and, and he was an awesome guy. And I just think he's awesome. Well, I'm kind of in awe of Brother Adam too, but it's a different awe. I'm like, all shucks. All phooey. No, it's a joke. But the point is as you change in life, you begin to see what you would think of as how they're different than you, how their gifts are different than you, how their talents are different than you. I preached for a lot of pastors as an evangelist, and it was something very common could happen, and I saw this over and over again, that if a ministry came up under a man, there would come a point of test where they would be tempted to tear down the person who had brought them up. It wasn't that they intentionally did it. It's that they have different gifts, they have different talents, they have different abilities, and they could see their elder do something in an area they were more talented in. Okay, they're more talented, and they could see the mistake because they're more talented in that area, and perhaps in some cases they were tempted to forget that elder would have gifts and abilities that they would be more able to them. But it's like the relationship comes to a point where it's a crisis, and you have to decide. I was with one pastor who I'm very close with, and we were somehow in the conversation, we were going through all the ministries that had come up under him, and almost every man who had come up under his ministry had rejected him, had got to a point and rejected him and turned into one of his critics. And I want to, for a little while, I want to try to teach against this idea of tearing down our elders and our mentors, because you have grown to a point where you're not just in awe, but you could be a critic if you would let yourself do it. There was a day you didn't have enough sense to criticize, but now you've been around the block, you've seen a few things, now you can criticize. There was a day when you were just the minnow in the pond and you were just hiding behind the lily pad, but now you have some credibility and now you have your own people looking to you, and you have to decide whether or not you're going to become a critic. There was a time when you didn't have eyes to see. Everything they did was awesome. They could have told you, we're going to paper the city red for Jesus. You'd have been like, my God, right now. And now you're like, really? What's that going to accomplish? You see, now you've grown, and you have to decide whether you're going to let them hold a precious place in your heart where you are still true to yourself, but you hold them reverently and you allow them to be a great Christian in your own estimation, or you fall into the habit of leaning back on what you have grown into and what you have accomplished, and now as a graduation present you give to yourself, you turn into a critic of the people who brought you to where you are. So in other positive thoughts, we deprive ourselves of heroes when we turn into critics. And it's not a good trade. That moment you had of feeling superior and laughing with your buddies over dinner was not a good trade for a hero of the faith in your life. That's unjust. And so let me read from Paul, 2 Corinthians 13, and I am quickly burning my candle, and the time is passing, so let me move along. 2 Corinthians 13 and 1, this is the third time I'm coming to you. Paul's writing. He wrote 3 books to the church in Corinth. We have 2 of them. We know them as 1st and 2nd Corinthians, but we actually have the 1st and the 3rd. We are missing the 2nd book of Corinthians. Someday, perhaps we will have it, and that will be very, very interesting. Paul says, I've tried twice before, now I'm writing to you the 3rd time. He says, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word should be established. Now, whenever a critique or a charge is brought against an individual, the Bible gives us in Deuteronomy, and where we're going to read in just a moment in 1 Timothy chapter number 5, it gives us an order on how this accusation should be managed, how it should progress. We do know that false accusation is tremendously damaging. False accusation is almost impossible to guard against. And you have to pray that the Lord will fight your battles in that regard, particularly in ministry. And I hope all of you mature believers, you understand this. There are a lot of accusations that can be made against ministry that ministry is not really able to defend themselves against. It would be inappropriate for them to speak in the manner their critic speaks. It would be inappropriate for them to share details in the manner their critic would share details. What would be a thoughtless barrage of verbal assault by a critic might be an ethical transgression for ministry. And so the Bible gives us an order of how this kind of a thing would happen. We read about witnesses. They would come and they would testify against that individual of wrongdoing. Both parties to the accusation would stand before the Lord, before the priests, and before the judges. And the judges shall make careful inquiry. Why careful inquiry? We have witnesses. Why make careful inquiry? We have witnesses. Here's why, because it's so hard to guard against false witness. And this passage is not simply about how to discipline. It is about a caution against false witnesses. And it starts with this idea of property boundaries. You shall not remove your neighbor's landmark. This is a very interesting introduction to the idea of bearing witness, true or false, against one or another. It's just astonishing when you think about it, because a landmark was something that could only be known by the preponderance of people who knew where it had been. Okay, watch this. You had to gather people. You see, they usually were stones. If they had a landmark that was unmovable, that's the best kind. But many of the landmarks literally would be a stone that a man or two or three strong men could move without a whole lot of drama. Indeed, if you had some type of a work animal, it would be even easier. And so you come out there one morning and the landmark has been moved 50 yards this way. Now, you know someone's moved your landmark. It relies upon the council of the community to determine where that is. And so elders would be gathered and they're like, I remember my uncle owned this land back. No, it's here. So the introduction to witnesses and bearing true witness or false witness is introduced to us in the idea of not moving landmarks. There are some things that must be protected by the community. It's not technically difficult to move it. And if you have no one who will step forward and say, no, that's not right, then transgression becomes the law of the land. But if people know, you could have witnesses to say, no, that's never been there. I know, I've lived in this thing. I've lived right up the creek. It's never been. This is where it goes. It's protected by the community itself. Do you realize that we protect the good name of our leaders, and we protect the good name of our ministry, and we protect the good name of this church ourselves? If you won't speak up to defend me, don't expect someone else to speak up to defend me. If you won't speak up to defend Brother Elms, don't expect someone else to speak up to Brother Elms. The landmark is dependent upon the community to enforce it. And so when you hear someone criticizing the music department, you don't need to let it just go away. You need to let them know you're not welcome to receive that. Why? You are guarding the good name of the ministry of the church. And you say, well, what if I agree with them? Well, you can still say something good about them. You think I like every song they sing? I don't. But criticize them around me and see what happens. I'll be quick to say, well, look, if every song's built on you, we won't have much of a church, will we? Do you see what I'm saying? The community protects the landmarks. You protect the good name of the church. You ought not to have an ashtray for an ear, ready to let people blow smoke in about anything to you at any time about anybody. No. You don't have to be ugly, but you protect it. And so he goes into this idea of witnesses, and it shows us this order given to us, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment if I can keep moving through my study notes here. Let me read 1 Timothy chapter number 5, and I'm going to read verse number 19 and 20. This is very often twisted. This passage is one of the most oft-twisted passages of the word of the Lord by a certain personality type. And so I have it here in my notes in King James, and I'm trying to find it in New King James. since they have that up on the screens. Let me read 1 Timothy 5:19. Do not receive, somebody say receive. Do not receive an accusation against an elder except from 2 or 3 witnesses. Okay? Are you guys with me there in the scripture? Do not receive accusation against an elder, or let me read it King James, against an elder receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses. Them that sin rebuke before all, that others may also fear. Now, the reason why there is this responsibility for 2 or 3 witnesses is to protect against the idea of false witnesses. There's been some fairly large stories in the news over the past few years of people who were able to destroy lives simply through false witness. Now, in politics, false witness is pretty much how you do politics. But outside of that realm, false witness can be a very damaging thing. There's one situation that comes to mind of a teacher who caught 2 girls skipping class, and he reported as he was supposed to, and they accused him of having inappropriate relationship you can imagine nature with both of them, and they both stepped forward and testified that he had done these things with both of them, and he lost everything. His name was trashed in the newspapers. He had death threats. He was charged with things. He was prosecuted for things. And then it came out. One of the girls got a attack of her conscience, and she came forward and she confessed and said that, look, he didn't do any of these things, but when he caught us skipping school, we agreed to say that he had done these things to us. False witness can be terribly damaging. And the tragedy of the news cycle nowadays is you don't have to be guilty. You don't have to be guilty. It's just the nature of the times. And so, one witness shall not rise up against a man for iniquity. This is Deuteronomy 19. For any sin, but at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, I know this is not liked by all, but the truth is, this is what the Bible says. And this idea of if you allow false witness, it is evil. That's not my word. That's the Bible's word for it. It is evil in the land. And by not allowing false witness, we put away evil from among us. God hates false witness. Proverbs 6:16, these 6 things the Lord hate. Yea, 7 are an abomination to him. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among the brethren. So here we read in 1 Timothy, against an elder receive not an accusation, except you have 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, what's interesting about this is the verb there is not believe. The word is receive. I want to pause on this. I want us all to see the importance of it. The writer's not saying against an elder, believe not an accusation unless you have 2 or 3 witnesses. He's saying against an elder, don't even receive an accusation unless you have 2 or 3 witnesses. Do you understand that distinction? Every year, thousands of cases are presented to the Supreme Court, hoping the Supreme Court will take them up. Of the thousands of cases that are proffered to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court will take up approximately so many cases. They get 6,000. This information is a few years old. They have over 6,000 offered to them a year. As of a few years back, it may be more now. Of those, the Supreme Court are only going to take a handful. They don't have time to do all 6,000. They will pick the ones that are most needed by the country, by the strictures of the legal system, by the necessary adjudication of the civil government. They will pick and choose. They will not just receive. They will pick and choose. And they will not hear it unless they have chosen it. Okay, and what the author is saying here, Paul writing to Timothy, he said, against an elder, don't receive it unless you have 2 or 3. Now, how is this practically applied in our life? There is no shortage of critics, okay? I'm not trying to pretend like leaders are always right. I'm trying to say justice matters. And there is order in the kingdom. And if we in error get beyond that order and we take justice into our own hand, then we are not simply erring against the individual, we are erring against justice, we are erring against the law, we are destroying our own authority when we attack another authority. That's why I talked about it last week. Paul wrote, and he said, or James wrote, he said, you've transgressed against the law, not the individual. And so the same law that gives them their authority gives you your authority, and you can't tear down their authority without tearing down your authority. Okay, don't have time for that. I'm running out of time. The point being, don't even receive an accusation unless they have the witnesses and the formal details and order in mind to do so. So it goes like this. There's a lot of people that will sit over dinner with you and talk bad about this person and talk bad about that person. But when you ask them, well, are you going to talk to the pastor about it? They'll say no. They will talk an hour about, well, I just don't think this, and I just think that, blah, 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 blah. Well, are you going to talk to the pastor about that? No. So what you have done is you have received all of this criticism, and nobody cares enough to do anything about it. Nobody has any real evidence. Nobody has any real jurisdiction, but you've received it. And what he is saying, let's imagine you and I are sitting at dinner and we're going to talk. We're just get carnal, and we all get carnal, so don't act too righteous. And you're going to trash somebody. I just don't think this, and I just don't think that. Or say, let's flip it. So I get to be the bad guy, you get to be the good guy. So I'm saying, I'm telling you what, I'll tell you right now, brother so-and-so this and brother so-and-so that. And I don't think Brother Huntley's doing a good job with the district. And I'll just tell you one thing, he's just too good of a preacher. That's his problem. He needs to get up there and struggle like I do. If he wasn't such a good preacher, then he'd understand us preachers. But he doesn't. He's too good. That sucker is too good. You can tell him I said so. So I've done all this, and so you decide. Here I am. I start going, and you decide. No, wait a minute. What do you mean? What do you mean? Are you serious? Is this real, or are you just talking? Because if it's not real, if this doesn't mean anything, I don't want, this isn't edifying. Do you see how you're not receiving it? Or if you're in a situation where it's awkward and you don't want to rebuke them, and that happens a very lot. In fact, it happens with me and you guys. Sometimes I'm talking to you guys and I don't want to rebuke you at that moment. It's just not the time or place, and I hadn't prayed about it. And I hadn't checked with my wife on what I should do. That was a joke. So you need to not receive it, but you don't want to rebuke them. You don't want to create a socially awkward moment. The trick is when they say something bad, you find a way to say something good. That's all you have to do. And they start getting the drive really, really quick. Well, I think Brother Nathan preaches too long. Yeah, but sometimes he acts ignorant, and we all laugh. You see, they say something bad, you say something good. They say something bad, and you will shut their little hot dog stand down. Against an elder, receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses. Okay? Now, let's talk about this mistranslation. I'm almost done. I'm going to try to be done in 3 minutes. The next passage, the second phrase in the logical condition. The second phrase after that is them that sin rebuke before all. In some passages, in many translations, there is the word but between them. So it would say against an elder receive not accusation except for 2 or 3 witnesses, but them that sin rebuke before all. In other words, the second half of the sentence is conditional upon the first half of the sentence. And what a lot of people want to do is they want to take that as a standalone And they want a lot of people rebuked publicly. My wife and I have a friend who was bragging about her church, and I don't know if she's bragging or crying out loud, I don't know, something like that. And she was talking about how in their church, this is how it goes. They could have service 4 or 5 hours, and the pastor preaches for about an hour and a half, and then his wife gets up after him, and she moves in the Spirit for about an hour and a half, and she rebukes people publicly and calls things out and sets people down. And my wife was like, I want to go to that church. That is so, that's in my heart. And she said, honey, you think Sunday, maybe, not even close. You get the idea. The point is that scripture becomes the justification for a people who love that kind of thing. But remember, what are we being told to rebuke publicly? We are rebuking publicly people who will receive an accusation against elders without any formal process of doing anything about it, without 2 or 3 witnesses. And when they do that, you should rebuke them publicly so that others should fear. So you know what? If we want to get real about this, I would say, Sister Dawn, I've been hearing you talking bad about me. You keep it up and I will set you down. She'll fight for me. After she said I didn't do a very good job. No, I'm teasing. Teasing. You get the idea? That rebuke is the conditional secondary phrase to the first phrase. It's not standing alone in its logic tree. Forgive me for getting all technical and rhetoric here, okay? It's the condition, the subcondition to the former statement. It's not a standalone branch on the logic tree. It goes like this. People don't receive accusations against elders unless there's something formal that's going to happen. Don't just sit around and talk bad about them. It hurts the church. It destroys unity. It destroys fellowship. Don't just sit around and criticize. If you're not going to do something about it, hush. If you don't think it gets to the level of doing something about it, hush. Don't destroy fellowship in the church. Don't destroy unity in the church. And if people do destroy that, if they do criticize, if they do receive without doing anything about it, you should rebuke them publicly. What? So, justice matters, and we want to honor elders. And I encourage you not to tear down elders in your life. As you grow in the faith, you will get to a point where you can criticize certain things about them. You will see my flaws as you grow. You will see errors I make as you grow. But you should protect mentors in your life. You should protect elders. Yes, all of our elders, all of us ourselves, we all get older, we all get slower. I'm not as sharp verbally or mentally as I once was, and it's getting worse every day. And a day will come when Brother Dewan will just shake his head and say, I don't know how he even gets up there anymore. He should let me get up there. And that day he's going to say, oh, but I love him. He's a fine, fine man. Let's all stand.
Thank you for watching First Church Charlotte. If you're in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, come join us at 4929 North Sharon-Amity Road at the corner of Shamrock Drive. Sunday mornings at 9 and 11 a.m. and Bible study Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. Online, find us at firstchurchclt.com or like us on Facebook or Twitter. We hope to see you soon. Come worship with us.